Hey there, folks. Something that I've been trying to get back to that I started a while ago, and I wanted to be a little bit more of a regular feature on here, was talking about spicy video games for adults. I've got a couple of videos out, but I haven't done one in a while. A couple of reasons for that. One is, regardless of the fact that I tried to be as non-explicit as possible with my language in that they got adult restricted anyway. That took the wind out of my sails a little bit. But other than that, it's just been finding the time. This channel, as much as I like it, isn't what pays my bills. So trying to find the time for this is something that I have to kind of squeeze in between the stuff that does. And I had decided what was going to be the next video game that I talk about. But there was a slight problem. As I was gathering my thoughts for it, I realized that I was going to spend possibly up to half the video, if not more, just explaining what one of the aspects in it even was and why it might be different from what folks thought it was. So I decided to do an explainer video. We are going to talk about Futas, or Futanari, if you want to go with the more lengthy term that is used in online spaces. And I'm going to talk about what it is, and more importantly, the way in which it is used in spicy content, be it video game, art, or writing, which are the main three ways you're going to come across this particular, let's call it a kink. It can manifest in other ways as well, but those are going to be the three main ones. I would file this under a fantasy kink, meaning something that is not actually possible in reality as depicted, at least not in the strictest sense. It's probably about the softest fantasy kink that I could think to explore. Like other examples might be furries. Anthropomorphized furries. Like, yes, you can get a fursuit, but the idea of actually getting with a fox girl, that is a fantasy. That is something that you need art or stories or video games to sort of get that connection with. Otherwise, it's something that you have to imagine because you can't actually experience that in real life. So that's an example of a fantasy kink or potential kink, not to imply that all furries are kinksters. They're not, but for some people, it is that. And it would just work as a comparison. So, futas. I suppose the crass way of putting it might be to call them, I'm hesitant to use this, but I think I just need to accept that this is going to be marked for adults, like the last few were, no matter how I word this. So let's not tiptoe around it. Dick girl might be another way to put it. But it is pretty specific in the way that this gets deployed.
Hey there, it's Vera jumping in from the edit because I have to make some adjustments to this because YouTube decided the original version was a community violation and gave me a strike over it. But anyways, while I was here fixing some other stuff, I thought I'd also point out that my thoughts and notes and points largely have to do with how futas are depicted in Western media. I've come to understand that there's a bit more variation than what I'm going to be discussing when it comes to anime and Japanese depictions of these same ideas. All right, so with that noted, I will hand it back to original me.
Now, if you find yourself thinking, isn't that basically just the same as a trans woman who hasn't had bottom surgery? We have those in real life, Vera. What do you mean it's a fantasy? Okay, so Futa and Futanari, when deployed as a kink, in media, whatever form it takes, is a bit more specific than that. And it is specific to the point that a actual trans woman doesn't really map on. You could maybe sort of make a connection between them, but there's a couple of things. The first is that when dealing with Futa or Futanari characters, they're pretty much never discussed in terms of having been assigned male at birth. Their younger years or growing up actually often won't be addressed at all because, we're dealing with adult material. Do we want to hear about these characters as kids? Probably not. So it's a topic rarely broached, but if it is, they never get discussed, or they never discuss themselves in terms of having to transition at some point or having previously been a man. They just kind of are. So you might be thinking, okay, so are we talking like sort of maybe like the extreme fantasy version of that? Because while it's not true in all of cases, there are some cases in which Futa characters will have both a penis and a vagina. That's not always true. There are some instances, especially with hand-drawn art, where you actually can't quite tell, because if they've been given a particularly ponderous set of testicles, then that's going to block the view of a vagina if they have one, unless you take some very specific angles of the imagery. But to get to the sort of main point and focus is that not 100%, because honestly, nothing's ever 100%, but the vast majority of the time, Futa doesn't just mean dick girl. It means extremely well endowed dick girl. And it's not just a matter of size. The ways in which Futa characters actually get deployed in fiction, in art, in games, is that they effectively have the sort of sex drive and being led around by their dick nature of an extremely horned up man, but they also have the often very exaggerated and heavy-chested curves that one would associate with an incredibly feminized woman. So it's not just a matter of taking a large penis and putting it on a traditionally curvy feminine woman. It's also about giving one a sex drive that is more comparable to a man. The idea that they can't help it when they get hard, and then when they do, there might be the sense of losing control, or, the brain goes fuzzy. And like sort of a horny haze is something that can show up for any gender when we're talking about spicy entertainment. But the ways in which it manifests with the people who are expected to be the penetrator as opposed to the penetratee, it just manifests differently. And Futas, by and large, are expected to be the tops. In my experience, at least, if a Futa is bottoming, it's for another Futa who has a bigger dick than she does. So there is this sense of very masculine power completely consolidated into a very large penis. But, again, the presentation is incredibly femme. And there is generally a sense of strength and dominance that you get from most Futas. Again, generally, if you're talking Futa fiction, art, or video games, or comics, or what have you, you are dealing with someone who is dominant and is topping. Again, unless there is another Futa with a bigger dick. So there is this very masculinized sex drive. They are depicted with having that kind of rampant horniness. Once they get going, they would do almost anything to stick their dicks in something that you would get normally from male characters in these kinds of pieces of art or entertainment. So that's what I mean when I say that Futas get deployed in very specific ways that trans women generally don't. It's pretty common in general for trans women to end up bottoming, partly for logistical reasons, especially if you're talking about, actual performers, live action, because depending on your specific hormone regimen, odds are that equipment doesn't work the same way anymore. Little peek behind the curtain, it's a little bit of a use it or lose it kind of a situation, because the muscles will atrophy over time. And going on estrogen and on spironolactone or T blockers or whatever you happen to be on has a tendency to result in a diminished sex drive and diminished erectile capacity. Not rendering you innately unable to get an erection, but they tend to be harder to get, harder to maintain. And again, if you don't sort of keep up with that, it's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. It's a muscle, after all. So when you're dealing with an actual trans woman, whether it be an actual performer or in a piece of fiction, they're far more likely to be feminized in terms of being a bottom or being submissive. I don't want to excessively overgeneralize the notion that women are submissive in bottoms, men are dominant in tops, but like general attitude, that is kind of the way that our society, even within our subcultures like kink, tend to view these things, which is kind of what is embodied by a futa, being incredibly feminine in every way except for that massive bulge. And their use of that is very masculine. And it is that specific combination that seems to really get deployed whenever you're dealing with a piece of fiction or art or entertainment that deals with them. So they are a little bit more specific and a little bit more idealized fantasy than an actual trans woman could be. And that's even setting aside the issue of whether or not they also have a vagina. Again, in my experience, at least, if that comes into play at all, it's again because they are being topped by a more dominant futa than they are. So it's not something that usually comes into play one way or the other. But it is interesting to me the fairly narrow way in which these characters get portrayed. And that is something that is actually going to come up when I now am able to get around to the game that I played where this discussion is relevant. But you can see the time code and how long I've gone on. If I'd had this conversation as part of a larger review, it was going to eat up way too much of the time. So I don't know when I will get to it, but now that I've got this setup video, I will now be able to make a video talking about Hard Times at Sequoia Park, which is a visual novel, which I don't play a ton of, but I gave this one a shot. It might be the only visual novel that I review for this spicy video game series. We will see. I've also played a number of other games in the last few months that I really want to find the time to talk about, but it's not just the playing and the filming, the editing, because I want to at least use a little bit of footage, even if I have to blur it in these, and it's just more work. Especially considering that these are guaranteed to get demonetized. Whee! Oh well. That's why this is a side gig that is when I have the time for it, because I don't get much reward financially. Although if you want to reward me financially, links to some stuff that you can partake in that is a little extra money that maybe will be something you would enjoy. There are various things down there to check out and consider. I haven't plugged my stuff like that for a while, now that I think of it. But thank you very much for coming to this conversation. I just find it interesting to talk about this stuff. Like, and to intellectualize about it, to think about it. Like, how is a futa different from just a trans character? And I actually find it really fascinating to think about the ways in which the things that a lot of people don't want to talk and think about because they think it's taboo, or it just makes them embarrassed. Like, oh, I don't want people to know that I'm knowledgeable about that. Like, I don't care. I'm in my 40s and I'm making porn. Like, I don't care. So it is interesting to me to just have frank conversations about this. And I hope you found it interesting as well. So thank you very much. And please remember that you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. Take care.